Well, it's 9 o'clock in the morning on Friday, October 5th, I guess. No, it's probably 4th, October 5th, 4th, something like that. Anyway, all the animals are lining up at the start line, so I wanted to catch that as they cross. Let me start taking the wire down. It's about 70 degrees. There's dew everywhere. Pretty high humidity. I was watching Greg Judy at George Heller's ranch, and he keeps the wire really low for the cows. This is where he keeps them for the cows. Maybe even a notch lower than this. But I think what he's doing is he puts the wire at eye level when they're grazing. You can see the calf. They keep their heads low. And wonder if that's why the calves were escaping as they're going under the wire. Anyway, let's open it up for them all. Let's try to get a video of them all crossing the way they do. And they're off. There they go. So I moved them here Tuesday morning. I was planning moving them Thursday evening, but whatever. They all lined up and they wanted to go, so I wanted to get the stampede. That little girl is suffering. Some of her hooves are not happy. Looks like her joints are stiff too, so I don't see any swelling though. But she does have long legs. This one, probably the front left leg, there's a little bit of soreness. This one has long hooves. Is that all of them? Looks like that's all. So I'm going to move the water now, and the salt block and the minerals. Get them all settled in their new row. That's what I got for you guys. That was it. A fantastic move. You know, let's go look at the animals. I haven't looked at the animals in detail for a while. Yeah, my wife and my son are running the food trailer now, which is kind of what I hoped it would be. Something to keep my wife occupied and, you know, spending time with the kids. And the sales are going pretty well, you know, so I can't complain. And Archie's, my oldest son, is learning how to run the trailer completely. Hopefully he'll take over. Not only that, but when the restaurant opens, I'm hoping he'll be like the manager, you know, run the operations and stuff. And the issue is we just don't have the energy anymore. We're getting older, and give him an opportunity that he otherwise wouldn't have, you know. So anyway, let's take a look at the animals here. Here's Yami. Yami! Yami! You're more interested in food than me now, huh? Look at her go after that grass. Look at that. It's kind of cool watching them eat grass. Gami, the male, the ram that lost his mom, and we bottle fed him, I was able to look at his teeth. He has a bunch of baby teeth on the bottom row of his mouth. It's kind of cute. But all the rams are getting older now. I haven't neutered any of them. I don't know that I will. So I've been debating selling the cows sooner rather than later in terms of financial standpoint. And that question just comes down to, would I rather have cash, some cash now or more cash later? And I can't really decide. Really, the question is if I borrowed that cash right now, that's something like when you're buying stock and stuff, the question you have to answer every day is, would I buy the stock that I own today? Right? And if the answer is no, the price is too high to buy, then the action is you got to sell. And if the answer is yes, I'd buy it, then you buy some more, right? That's basically the thought process you have to have when you're working the stock market. Obviously, there's other things that go into that, but that's the basic question. Would I buy at this price? And so with cattle, it's the same thing. These are dollars on hooves, right? It's a money bag. I can take this cow to the market. I could sell him, the steer right now. I'd get a certain amount of money for that calf. So that's like the dollar sign on top of that calf's head. And so the question is, would I go to the market and buy that particular calf? Now, obviously, the calf is worth more to me than the market because I know that calf and the market doesn't, right? So if somebody's going to buy a stranger's calf, they're not going to be willing to pay as much because they don't know the history of that calf or the general health of that calf, whereas I do. I know the calf's mom and everything like that, right? So I have a little bit of a advantage in that I know more about these calves than the market does. So they're worth slightly more to me than they are to the marketplace, right? But the value that I put on it is kind of irrelevant. Because really the value is the future that I can get for it, right? So I take all things and I consider, what the future value, that's the current value is for me, right? And the market, they do the same calculation, but it's slightly different for them because they don't have as much information, right? Anyway, so the question is, would I go and take my cash, if I had cash in a bank right now, and buy these animals, hold on to them for a few more months, and then sell them? And I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is that even if I had to borrow that money, let's say at 8 or 9% interest, maybe 10% interest, right? That's an annual interest rate, right? So let's just estimate 2% per month, which is probably way too much. Probably 1.5%. Let's just say 1% a month, right? So I go and borrow that money at 1% a month. Is the calf going to put on more value? Let's see, 1% would be like $25 if they're $2,500 animals, right? Are they going to grow in value by $25 in a month? And given that they're probably putting about 2 pounds on a month, maybe less, because they're not as big or grass isn't as good as feed, and those pounds are worth, I don't know, $2 or whatever, let's say, right? So 2 pounds a day, that's $4 a day per animal, so that's $120 a month, right? So it does make sense to hold on to them, right? At some point, I'll have to get rid of them to make room for more animals, but that is not the case right now. And given that I've got so much grass and so much hay, I think it makes a lot of sense to use that hay to make a little extra money, hold the animals for a little longer, put a little more manure on my pasture, put a little more pressure on the weeds and on the grass, right? So that's kind of the calculation you have to do. Now, animals are amazing. Even cows have a pretty good return on investment, right? The limiting factor is the number of animals you can have, right? So I can't just go out and buy 1,000 cows right now. The big consideration is the amount of land that I have to hold those animals, but also the labor and the experience and the skill, right? Because there is a fair amount of risk with each animal. And if I get a bunch of animals put together, there's a good chance that some of them might die, right? So the kind of the game is I want to get as many animals as I can, but not too many, So now in the future, if I decide that I'm going to do even more animals, that I think that I have the labor and the skill and the energy to invest in running more animals, which I am, right? Then that means either I have to increase the productivity per acre, the number of AUs that I can run per acre, which right now is about 1/2, so 2 acres per AU, right? And or get more land, right? So I do think at some point I want to get more land. I think that's one of my goals. My wife doesn't like it. She's like, no, you're not getting more land. But I was thinking about this. Does it make sense for me to borrow money to buy land, right? And that's a different equation, because you're not paying interest on the number of animals, you're paying interest on the value of the land, which can be very, very significant compared to the animals. There's another thought that I had, and this is at the 10-minute mark, but I think this is a good thought. So in my church, we have something called, so when the pioneers were crossing the plains to get to the Salt Lake Valley from eastern United States, even as far as Europe and England and stuff like that, one of the problems was that most of the members of the church, the saints, were poor. They didn't have money. And so the church was looking for a way to help them cross the plains, to come and gather in the Salt Lake Valley. And so through prophetic inspiration, they set up what was called the Perpetual Immigration Fund. And the way that Perpetual Immigration Fund worked is that the church would basically give money. It was more of a loan than anything else, but they would give money to people so they can buy the things they need to get to the Salt Lake Valley, whatever that was, if it was tickets on a ship to cross the Atlantic, or if that was a hand cart and supplies, right? And then they would work to cross the plains, and then once they arrived in the plains, they would get set up in some sort of business, right? Since there was a bunch of land, farming was kind of the order of the day. And I believe the fund would help them get started on that farm too, right? So they would, get a workhorse or seed, things like that, a plow, to get started, right? And then the expectation was that not only would they pay that money back and put a little extra into the fund, but that they would donate the surplus that they had to the Perpetual Immigration Fund so more people could come, right? And that was a resounding success. That lasted for a long time. And up until the railroad was built, it helped move a lot of saints across the plains and get them established fairly quickly. One of the interesting things is that in our church history is that the saints, they weren't poor. There was a couple times when food was short. But looking back, you never really look at them and say, oh, they were poor, right? They had limited funds. They didn't have a lot of cash. But they're fairly rapidly able to provide for their needs, such that, after the first couple initial disasters, they're pretty much set. They weren't going anywhere. You know what I mean? And I think it was because of that inspired process where you help somebody get a start, and then they're expected to donate and help others get a start, right? To kind of pay it forward. And in the 90s, President Hinckley, through inspired prophetic counsel, he set up what was called the Perpetual Education Fund, right? The idea being that there were members of the church who were sacrificing to serve missions in their early 20s, right? And they had very limited opportunities in their homelands, right? And education was much more expensive than they could possibly earn. In the United States, we didn't really have that problem in the 90s at the time, right? Because I could put myself through college just working part-time jobs and stuff. I earned a physics degree in the year 2000. It really wasn't that hard. I think I borrowed $10,000 at the end just so I could study more, spend more time in the lab. Anyway, so the Perpetual Education Fund provided a method whereby members of the church could access, education funds, learn a trade, or get an advanced degree and provide for their families into the future. And it was kind of interesting because fairly early on, the church advised members of the church to stop donating to the Perpetual Education Fund because there was too much money. They're like, there's no way we can possibly use this money to educate the entire church. And so, please stop donating. But the people who were blessed with the Perpetual Education Fund were encouraged to give back and give a little extra on top, right? So I think with that money, actually, the church is building out BYU Idaho. And from what I can tell, the mission of BYU Idaho is to build a university that could offer advanced degrees where nobody's turned away. Basically an infinite capacity university. And it's remarkable. I've been kind of following along, not too much in detail, but a little bit, about the progress of BYU Idaho. I remember about 4 or 5 years ago, I looked at their website and looked at their math and physics department. It was like one math professor and one physics professor. And recently I went back and looked at it. Now there's like 5, So they're adding more and more staff over time. And my daughter reports that their math program and their physics program is actually quite robust. I don't think it has the recognition yet, but it will. As graduating students, as they go out into the world and people go, oh, where'd you get your degree from? And they're like, oh, BYU Idaho. And they're like, oh, that sounds like a good school. Then if they're producing people like you. Kind of a side note, and I've been on a tangent for a while now, but the side note is that the area that I grew up in, the Pacific Northwest there near Seattle, what happened was Boeing recognized that graduates of BYU Engineering College were really the best for a variety of reasons. And so Boeing basically hired all of them for several years. So a bunch of members of our church immigrated out to the Pacific Northwest to work for Boeing. So much so that when I was growing up, I didn't really understand that members of my church did anything else but engineering for Boeing, right? Just because everybody around me was a Boeing engineer growing up. My dad was a Boeing engineer and things like that, right? So anyway, so that's kind of the church's Perpetual Education Fund. The thing that I was thinking about is what would it take to start a perpetual regenerative agricultural fund? And kind of the way it would work is you take kids who have completed some kind of program to learn how to do regenerative agriculture. And I don't know what that program would look like, but my imagination is that people that are doing regenerative agriculture across America would invite people to work on their farms who are, fresh out of high school. You probably don't even need to be a high school grad, right? So maybe teenage kids could work on a regenerative farm, right? Learn the techniques, learn what works, build a network, importantly, build a network of people that they can talk with and rely on, And after a few years, I don't think it takes that long to learn the techniques. But after a few years, they have practical experience under the tutelage and kind of an apprentice program under somebody that has the ability to actually do regenerative agriculture, right? And then from there, they basically receive funds to purchase land or, obtain lease on a land or something like that, a long-term lease. And the initial equipment, maybe living expenses for the first couple of years while they get started. And of course, the initial purchases of animals and things like that, right? And the expectation being obviously that they're going to pay that money back, not with interest, but with extra donations so that they could pay it forward. Now, the beauty of this program would be that the people who are able to successfully start a farm this way and provide, a living, would also be the future educators, right? And so they would invite people to work on their farm who have no experience but want to learn about regenerative agriculture and agriculture in general. And after a couple of years, they could access the funds. And it might also provide a means whereby people who, would like to get into regenerative agriculture but are too old, or like they have land that they have but they're not able to work it because they're not able to for whatever reason. But they could donate or lease that land, or they can donate to the fund directly, and maybe even have a pawn shop of sorts where people who have old equipment, they could just pass it along, kind of like a what is it called? Salvation Army, I guess they do that, where they have stores where you can go and buy stuff at discount prices that are used, I don't know. It's just a thought. A lot of this stuff that I use, it's no good used. After a while it wears out, and I'm expecting after 3 to 4 years, let's put it this way, every 5 years I'd probably have to replace everything. So I'm counting that as part of my expenses. Is there's kind of if I buy $1,000 worth of equipment, then that's $200 a year that I'm spending on equipment, because it's going to wear out and I have to replace it, right? Anyway, but the point is that I think there's an opportunity for something like that. I don't know how to get started. I don't feel comfortable inviting people to work on my land because I'm still learning. I haven't really hit the jackpot in terms of productivity or profit or anything like that yet. I'm thinking that 60 acres might be the lower limit of what's possible to make a living full-time on the land. Probably 300 acres is closer to what you need in this area, and if you're in a drier climate, maybe 5,000 or 3,000 thousands of acres is what you'd need in western United States. I don't know what it looked like, but that's something that interests me and something that I think about. Anyway, guys, have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.